Ben Shapiro was outraged about regulations. And this took him to make a statement where he would probably say, well, by the letter of the law, everything I have said is factually correct. But I'm going to make it clear why he's disingenuous at best. This is his claim about wages in the United States. He seems to think that there is, quote, no such thing as a non-living wage. Let's hear him out.
Well, I mean, first of all, the wage to cost of living gap would not exist in the absence of regulation and subsidy, at least not nearly as much. The fact of the matter is that one of the reasons you have housing shortages in blue areas is because of development restrictions that are largely created by the left. The reason
okay, pause it for a sec. Let's start this. Let's start this over again. He says, I want to just have people listen to the disingenuousness of this. Start over.
Well, I mean, first of all, the wage to cost of living gap would not exist in the absence of regulation and subsidy, at least not nearly as much. The fact of the matter is that one of the reasons you have housing shortages in blue areas is because of development restrictions that are largely created by the left. The reason that you have massive inflation right now is, again, because of left-wing financial policy.
Okay, pause it. Everything he said there is a complete lie. So the premise of when he's going to say that there's no such thing as a non-living wage, all of that is a complete lie. That the wage to cost of living gap would not exist if there was not regulation. You know what is a regulation? Is the minimum wage. The minimum wage is a statute that regulates industry, employers throughout this country that says that you are not allowed to pay a worker less than this wage. And right now, it has not increased in decades, despite a yearly increase in the productivity of the American economy and the American worker. The wage increases that have been marginal have not come close to catching up with productivity and things like inflation. Why, do you ask? Because the regulations themselves have not been updated. So that the entire premise of what he has to say there is completely false. And then he blames blue city policies that restrict, essentially what he's trying to say, free industry from building more housing that would be affordable. His whole model of completely privatized free marketplace housing is anti-worker, anti-low wage. The reason that we have increased rental prices in this country is because we have a shortage of affordable housing and public housing. And there has been a federal moratorium on funds going to public housing developments in this country for decades. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like 2 years ago, brought up the repeal, I think it's of the Faircloth Amendment, which is what puts that ban on that funding. That is the reason why we have increased rental prices. But let's start again from the beginning, now that I've given you that context, because all of these lies are a prelude to the ultimate lie about wages.
Well, I mean, first of all, the wage to cost of living gap would not exist in the absence of regulation and subsidy, at least not nearly as much. The fact of the matter is that one of the reasons you have housing shortages in blue areas is because of development restrictions that are largely created by the left. The reason that you have massive inflation right now is, again, because of left-wing financial policy. It tends to be that wages move in tandem with costs, generally speaking, because, again, there is no such thing as a non-living wage. Nobody dies on their wage. And that is not a thing that happens inside the United States. This is why when people say living wage, the question is, well, what do you mean by a non-living wage? Do you just mean a wage that you don't think is high enough? And for what job? And what does the market look like?
Has this guy ever met a poor person? I don't know. I can't say that definitively. But if he wants to play the semantics game, saying that there's no such thing as a non-living wage in the United States, that nobody dies on their wage, that's not true. There are plenty of people in this country that have chronic conditions don't get paid enough to cover it. Their insurance doesn't cover enough of it. Their wage has to go entirely to their health care, and sometimes they're not able to do so, and they die. Their child's health care, they don't have enough money to cover certain costs, and they die. And something like homelessness, that also leads to people dying. There was a UChicago study I tweeted out, shortly after the show yesterday when I saw this clip. About 53% of sheltered homeless had, quote, formal labor market earnings in the year that they were observed as homeless. 40.4% of the unsheltered population had at least some formal employment in the year they were observed as homeless. There was also a study of New York City showing that 45% of single adults and 38% of homeless adults in families, this was a Cityscape study, still earned wages from their employment while homeless. Well, he would say, well, technically you can be alive while you're still alive when you're homeless. You're just too stupid to get a job. Well, they have a job, dude. But he would still go back on semantics there and say, oh, well, they're technically still alive. Homelessness, though, is I would not say that's a livable situation for people, but his very letter of the law definition of livable is a way to obscure his brutality, his barbarity. There are plenty of people in this country who who are not making living wages. And I also want to say, too, when he talks about the free market solving all of this crap, major corporations in this country choose not to increase the wages of their employees because they have an understanding that, okay, well, maybe they can claim government benefits because they're below a certain poverty line. They offset the costs of labor to the state because they are not regulated to pay their employees a living wage enough for them to live. So does that constitute not a living wage if, say, somebody that works at CVS or Target or Walmart, I mean, I don't even remember off the top of my head what their wages are, or at Hobby Lobby or something like that, doesn't have the capacity to live off of that one singular wage at their employment, and then they have to get SNAP benefits or other kinds of government benefits to subsidize it. Does that also count as a living wage by Ben Shapiro's definition because the state is subsidizing it? It shouldn't, because his solution to the world is free market enterprise. That's going to solve everything. That'll also solve the cost of housing, which is completely antithetical to any kind of international example where they have, in some Scandinavian countries, tenants associations that have equal bargaining power with buildings and such, apartment complexes and other things. Like, this dude is the same guy that said, if you experience climate change, just sell your house. Who's going to buy that house in the free market? The underwater house. Who actually is going to increase wages without regulation so that their employees can live when they know that there are some very threadbare government programs that will help their employees survive, even if they're living in their car. And by the way, those same damn programs are what conservatives like that guy want to eliminate. It reminds me also of the semantics done about COVID. Like, he didn't die of COVID, he just died of organ damage. That's how it was listed officially on his death certificate. Poverty is a sickness. It exacerbates other sicknesses, illnesses. There are studies done about people's life expectancy, about their health outcomes. Not making a living wage does kill people. It might not kill them in terms of, the archaic definition of like starvation that he's trying to rely this on in this example. But it does kill them in the United States. And we are the wealthiest country on earth. Yeah. I mean, it's just like... Can't believe this guy is taken seriously at all.